Welcome back to PASC 2026 and Bern, and we have just had a spellbinding invited keynote on science, society, and computation, where Reto Knutti has explained the importance of climate change and also trusted models from climate to LLMs. So Reto, in particular with the weather in Switzerland today and everything, I don't think anybody is doubting anymore that we have massive climate change. But why do we need, if we know that the climate change is already here, why do we need to keep simulating?
Well, in fact, we've known for a very long time, right? The first scientific discussions go back more than a century, and since 50 years we have models, and we're getting better and better in observing and simulating and predicting. We don't need any further models to say that we need to reduce CO2. That's been obvious for a very long time. But when you talk about adaptation, so managing the risks from climate change, we do need the high resolution information. So if you want to build a dam to protect you from water, then the small scales matter. If you talk about tourism, about skiing, then the small scales matter. But also in the atmosphere, about some small scale cloud processes, computing still matters. And unfortunately, these models are extremely expensive. They produce a lot of data. So we're still not even close to the answers that we would like to have.
Okay, so that sounds fair. And of course, climate simulation is probably about the more worthwhile thing we can do on these computers. And yet, these computers are massive energy consumers themselves, right? That how much of a load are we creating on the environment basically by running climate simulations?
Well, it's a fair point, right? And we even think about it ourselves. How many of these models do we need? How many simulations do we need? But one thing, of course, is that we don't really have an energy problem. I mean, in some places we do, but in most places we just have a fossil fuel problem. So as long as we produce electricity in a clean way from solar, from wind, whatever, this is not necessarily a problem. And the second, of course, is the benefit we can have to society, right? We're producing a huge amount of knowledge, and that can prevent billions of damage. So it's obvious that anything we do has some impacts. I mean, we cannot do without, but hopefully the added value is much larger than the cost we're producing. And then when we talk about AI and all of these modern technologies, obviously, then we can do these things much more cheaply. So a weather forecast model based on machine learning AI is 100 or 1,000 times cheaper than a physics-based model. So we can actually do better on that side.
And I see, as a non-Swiss person, I see Switzerland as a pioneer. On the one hand, you have some of the cleanest electricity in Europe, at least. And I also see CSC has been a pioneer that every computer does not necessarily have to stand in Switzerland, but place it where the energy is cleanest and cheapest and everything, and also invest massively in software to help people like you develop models.
Absolutely, you need to put the computer where the energy is clean and when the cooling is easy, right? So maybe you don't go to the warmest places, but go to cooler places and so on. So I think the value of these things is massive if we do it right. But we need to think about what is missing, what is needed, and then work on those problems.
So both your team and many others have made fantastic advances on modeling everything from the Earth and climate. And yet we see very worrying signs in the world at all. NCAR is being closed in the US and everything. Will Europe need to step up? Should we do more in joining forces in these models as caretakers internationally?
I mean, I think there's two elements here. One is the US role, and US is, of course, generally not helping in this discussion. They're exiting the World Meteorological Organization, IPCC, UNFCCC, and all of these things. They're switching off instruments. The US has massive funding in observation system, in satellites. Right? So without these things, we're really lost, and that international collaboration starts to become relevant. Europe should step up and do more. On a broader scale, of course, we're seeing a bit of a decline in environmental and climate and sustainability topics. The world is dominated by geopolitics, by war, by money, by other things. So inevitably, these things get less attention. But things will not get better if we don't act. So the pressure is going to remain.
Yeah, and speaking of acting, I know you touched upon this several times in your talk, right? That for most of us, there is no question about this change happening. And again, in particular with this heat wave we're in Europe right now. But what should we do about it? Like, more simulations is likely not going to convince them, right?
No, I think obviously the decarbonization is coming with a clear political framework, and I call it framework because it could be anything. It could be a subsidy, it could be a CO2 tax, whatever, but you need to incentivize the change, and maybe you need to tax the poor things that you don't want anymore. and such that technologies become attractive. It's battery electric cars, it's heat pumps, it's changes in diet, it's CO2 removal from the atmosphere, it's synthetic fuel. I mean, all of these things are here. Not quite all, but most of the things are already here. What we're lacking is the incentive to change and people seeing that there's a value of changing. And that's been challenging so far, also in this country, which is fairly conservative, but I'm convinced that this could be done.
And I think that's a very positive message, and change can happen if we just decide that it should. Nathan, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.